Shabbat Shalom. And this is Bereshit. Bereshit, the first reading of the new readings for the new year. Bereshit bara Elohim, we read, in the beginning there was God. Bereshit means beginning. Actually, before there was a beginning, before anything else existed, there was nothing. There was no matter. There was no universe. There were no stars, no sun. There was nothing at all, except there was God. God existed before time and space, before matter, before atoms, before anything. God existed. Something that's difficult, I think, for us to get our heads around. God existed, but in the nothingness, there was no one to know him. So God chose to create from nothing by his thoughts alone. God is the originator not only of creation, but of creativity. When he alone existed, his thoughts were creative, and with them he made everything that came into existence. He does not tell us how he created. That's very important. He really doesn't tell us how, but only that he did. That's the important thing. Creation was accomplished in an orderly manner because that is God's nature, just as what you make has your imprint on it. And God is not the author of chaos. And when the earth, created by God from nothing, was without form and void, tohu avohu, God made something of it, just as you might, if you could, create a bowl out of a lump of clay. Because he could, he created unique beauty which is beyond belief, beyond imagination. We cannot understand or imagine the kinds of things he created. And we continue to marvel at the wondrous sights and sounds and creatures that he has made, from sunrises and sunsets to glow-in-the-dark fish, from mysterious tropical flowers to giant blue whales to tiny lime green frogs. Two accounts are given of God's creative endeavor. From a literary perspective, it's quite easy to differentiate between the two narratives. Firstly, Bereshit 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 3, describes creation in specific periods of time, 7 days, but 7 days to God is nothing. Secondly, Bereshit 2, this account places humanity in Gan Eden. These two narratives are not contradictory. They're meant to complement one another. And each stage of creation is set apart as unique. The phrase Vayomer Elohim, and God said, is followed by an act of creation. The appearance of something that never previously existed except in the mind of God, ending with Vayi Ken, and so it was. This is frequently followed by God providing names or duties to what he has created. In days 3 and 6, we find the basic formula repeated twice. The phrase Vayomer Elohim appears twice on each of these days, each time followed by a distinct act of creation. This is followed by the evaluation, Vayo Elohim Kitov, and God saw that it was good, which suggests that each of these days contained, well, several acts, 2 acts of creation. During each of the 6 days, but remember, time didn't actually exist until God created it. God created yet another aspect of the universe in each of these days. Light is created, and it's separated from dark. Day is separated from night. The waters are created and separated into waters above and waters below. The dry land is created, and it's separated from the seas. The sun and the moon and all of the stars and all the planets are created, and each is unique, distinct, individual. The countless birds and the fish are created, and they're separated from one another into species. The land animals are created with unique qualities. And through all of this, God is teaching us by the use of recurring patterns that these complementary pairings are significant. The act of separating them into equal pairings shows us that one does not and cannot exist without the other. Why, with all that he'd created, did God choose to create the human being? He had created a universe, the extent of which he alone knows, even today, with so-called modern science and astronomy. He created flora, huge varieties of trees and plants and flowers, grasses on land as well as in the seas. He made fauna, animals and sea creatures that are so unique and diverse that only he could possibly have thought them up. And then he gave them life. Imagine suggesting that these just happened. Even if humans are able to clone, we are unable to create new life from nothing. Surely, with such amazing creatures, God had sufficiently exercised his creative instinct. But no, it seems all of this was not enough. God then created something quite different from the fauna that he had made. He created Adama for the specific purpose of providing himself with a creature that had some of his own qualities, with whom he could have a special relationship. He made Adama from the dust of the earth. The words for earth and man are from the same root in Ivrit as is the word for blood. I like the translation of Adam as earthling, derived from Adama, which means earth. So God created an earthling. Adama is a general term for humankind, encompassing both male and female. In some remarkable and mysterious way, God gave Adama something of himself. He breathed into Adama an eternal spirit. Spirit, breath, and wind all come from the same Hebrew root. In this way, he linked himself with Adama forever. And he created the Adama as a sentient creature with whom he could uniquely communicate, unlike all the other creatures he had made previously. God chose to invest himself in this creature more than in any other, and to establish with Adama a covenantal relationship, which tells us a great deal about the character and the nature of God. He is often described by Christians as the Old Testament God of judgment or the New Testament God of love. But it's obvious from these descriptions that those who created them and use them are people who have never really known God and have no idea of who he really is. Jews title him Melech, king or ruler of the universe. King, redeemer, savior, and shield. Blessed are you, shield of Abraham. From the beginning of Adama, God interested himself in the needs and desires of this being that he'd created with opposable thumbs. He saw that the Adama needed someone like himself, and from Adama, he created two beings who were at once the same and yet opposite. Woman was not just an afterthought, created to be a lowly helper. Woman is half of the original whole Adama, half of the team assigned to care for our world. Man was seen as incomplete without woman. Woman and man together are Adama, with equal value, equal responsibility to coexist in a manner which respects all of Hashem's creation. God also created the plan for a committed covenant relationship founded in physical, emotional, and spiritual love. All three need to be present. He created a system of reproduction that also expressed something unique to humans, love, but more than love. This meant that humanity could multiply. Two beings could become a family and create continuity. God provided them with a beautiful home, a garden that was filled with every good thing and every provision for their needs. And he walked with them in the garden in the evenings. God had a very special relationship with Adam and Chava, his Adama. And what about these human beings? Well, having been created by God and welcomed into a relationship with the Creator and King of the universe, and having experienced and enjoyed much of what God had to offer. There would undoubtedly have been more with time. Human beings turned their backs on God, showing indifference to God himself and to his requirements for a continuing relationship. The first sin, Adam's rejection of God's law, the only law that had been given at that point, estranged him from the relationship God desired to have with him. God and his Adama were alienated by man's refusal to live according to God's commandments. This disconnection and separation grew when Adam and Chava's son Cain murdered his brother Abel, making Cain forever an outcast. We know that Adam and Chava and their family continued to have some relationship with God, although it was different from that which God had intended, because Cain and Abel both knew and understood the need for certain types of sacrifices to be brought to God, offerings, as a sign of thanksgiving and worship. When Cain was sent away, we're told that he went out from the presence of God, indicating a much greater separation from the connection that God had with Adam and Chava. The family of Adama continued. Some humans desired to be obedient to God and his requirements, which he must have made known because otherwise there wouldn't have been any. Well, most of them sadly lived in rebellion and wickedness. That this was possible clearly indicates that God's ways could be known and followed, but that Adama preferred wickedness. Through the descendants of Chava and Adam's son Set, God continued to have a relationship with those who cared to follow his ways. But evil prevailed in this family of Adama to such a degree that God chose from the line of Set a man called Noah and his family to begin again his relationship with Adama. God chose to work through the line of only one of Noah's sons, Shem. And in due time, from this line, the Semites, came Avram, who was chosen by God with his wife Sarai to create a nation especially related to God through covenant. He set this nation apart from all other nations of the earth to have a unique relationship with him and to exhibit his truth. He made an eternal covenant with Abram and his children through Yitzhak, and Yaakov. He worked in and through the family of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and those who attached themselves to it, as he will continue to do through eternity. And so we see that part of the beginnings that we read about is the beginning of the nation of Israel. God called Avram and established a unilateral covenant with him. And Avram, whose name God changed to Avraham, followed God. God continued this covenant with Avraham's son Yitzhak and with Yitzhak's son Yaakov, whose name he changed to Yisrael. In doing this, he rejected Avraham's son, not born of Sarah, and called Yitzhak, son of Sarah, Avraham's only son. He rejected Yitzhak's firstborn son Esau, who also chose not to seek or follow God. The family of Israel went down to Egypt, and after more than 400 years, God redeemed them and brought them to the land he had promised to Abraham. This was accomplished through his servant Moshe. God gave Israel his commandments. This had always been his plan. Like Adam, Israel sinned against God and caused a division between this covenant nation and her God. There were times when Israel was so polluted with violence and evil that God had to distance himself from us by sending us into exile, away from the land with which we and he are intrinsically connected. We read of God's plan for Israel in the Haftorah portion for this week. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness and have taken hold of your hand and kept you and set you for a light to the nations. God's eternal plan, formulated before he began to create anything, is still in effect, and it cannot be thwarted either by humans or by Hasatan. This means that Israel, although disciplined by God, has never been abandoned or repudiated. Even if most of the people of Israel fail to understand God's plan, as Rav Shaul wrote, those who are the remnant continue to have a personal relationship with him. Through obedience to his commandments and acceptance of the provision of redemption, the atonement of Mashiach Yeshua, those from among the Goyim can also become part of this family. God's further continuing plan for Abraham's physical descendants involves complete repatriation to the land he gave us for eternity, and restoration to the relationship that he created us to have with him. The ultimate fruition of his plan for the nation of Israel is access to God for people of all nations, available through Israel, no matter how far removed from the God of Israel, if they truly seek him. All may come through Israel and through the Mashiach of Israel into a relationship with God with the same obedience and acceptance of God's provision for deliverance and the same things that the people of Israel are offered, as we see in Romans 1, verse 16. They become incorporated into the nation and people of Israel by faith and by choice as adopted descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. What of humanity in general? Well, we read in one of the Psalms, but also in Romans chapter 1, for the truth about God is known to them instinctively. God has put this knowledge in their heart. Since earliest times, man has seen the earth and the sky and all that God has made, and has known of his existence and his great eternal power. So they will have no excuse when they stand before God on Judgment Day. God confirmed through Rav Shaul that all human beings, all descendants of Adam and Chava, all descendants of Noach, are without excuse before God, their Creator. Human beings know that God exists no matter what they say, because God has placed this knowledge within them. It's part of their DNA. They can also see what God has created And from what they see, they can deduce the Creator and know His power. How ridiculous to say that it just happened. It's like saying that a beautiful lilac vase just happened. Human reasoning, unless twisted and perverted, leads one to the natural conclusion that God is there. By extrapolation, if one can know God exists, one has the obligation to seek His ways and to be obedient to His commandments. Clearly, just as Adam and Chava walked away from God, each and every individual born since then has had the same choice. We can choose to follow in the footsteps of the first family. Disobedience to God's commands means alienation from God. Further rebellion spells further condemnation. Rav Shaul continued in descriptive language the lifestyle, outlined the lifestyle of those who've rebelled against God and whom God allows to go their own way. We can choose to seek after God. He holds out to us the plan of redemption and restoration through obedience and faith as part of the one people Israel. Remember, Yeshua said, salvation is of the Jews. We can acknowledge God's ongoing plan for humanity. We can choose to be part of God's solution and part of God's family. Rav Shaul addressed his remarks to pagans and former pagans in Rome, that is, converts from among the nations, as by that time there would have been few Jews by birth remaining in the Roman Kahila, because Jews had been banished in 49 to 50 CE by Emperor Claudius, according to Roman historian Suetonius. Rome was the center of a pagan empire, which encompassed many peoples and many religions. Most of these religions and their gods were perverted and evil beyond belief. All of these religions claimed deities who could impact the lives of those who worshiped them in some way, for a price, of course. But only the God of Israel claims to have created all things. He also says that every human being can see that He is God by His creation, cause and effect. Furthermore, the God of Israel imposes moral and ethical restraints and conditions upon those who worship Him and claim Him as their God. He declares that only He can grant His followers eternal life with Him. Those who choose to turn away from the one and only God know the consequences of their actions of rebellion and wickedness. If we choose instead to live lives which honor God, those who are living in rebellion might eventually come to recognize, desire, and even accept God's mercy and compassion. God is patient with those He has created, and He declares that He is not willing that any should perish. We must likewise be patient with those around us, showing His loving kindness to them, filled with compassion for those who are separated from God. We know the truth, and we who know the truth must be faithful to live in such a way that our people and all those around us will be drawn to the God of Israel. For I am not ashamed of this Besorah message about Mashiach. It is God's powerful method of bringing all who believe to heaven. This message was first preached to the Jews alone, but now everyone is invited to come to God in this same way. When God created the heavens and the earth, he knew that you would one day come into a covenant relationship with him through Mashiach Yeshua. I hope that's true of you. And he looked forward to that day. It is his desire that the covenant relationship he established with Israel might be extended to those of the household of Israel first, but also to those from among the nations, whichever category you are in. May we choose to be instruments of his shalom and simcha in the world he created with such boundless chesed, loving kindness, and rachamim, mercy. Have a blessed and wonderful Shabbat.